Here.
Now, the first treasurer's report comes first. I click on that, and that one right here. And then if you want any of your other two things, I can click on them. Are you okay? Are you good? Don't make me.
John Hayes is going to do the.
I did this yesterday.
I got the
No, you're supposed to let me down. John runs up and sits in the chair. And don't call Art.
And you got in contact with.
Just let me lay. She'll sit right over me and she'll take it.
For the award, yeah, she is in contact. I guess it's the local administrative.
Stuff before we get started.
Zach or
It's a woman.
Johanna?
Hey, Chris, are you on the phone? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. We're going to get started any minute now. We're just queuing up the AV.
Ricky, John Hayes on the phone as well.
Oh, good. Good afternoon, John. Welcome. We're getting ready to
Hi, Eddie.
start the meeting. Should we grab the door?
Hey. Good doors. There you step. Kidneys are still struggling with that.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our February meeting of the Lehigh Northampton Airport Authority Board of Governors. I am standing in for Chuck Diacon, and hopefully we'll have a good, productive meeting in his absence. Before we start, I'd like everybody to please rise and conduct the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Call the meeting to order, please, at 5 after 12. And if you don't mind, if we can just conduct a roll call.
Sure. Brian Dames. Chuck Diacon. Michael Dowd. Frank Fasciano.
Here.
Glenn Geisinger.
Present.
John Hayes.
Here.
Larry Hemberger.
Present.
Ed Lozano.
Present.
Jeff Matskin. Glenn Reedman.
Present.
Ken Rosenberger.
Here.
Michael Schwer.
Here.
Matthew Turk.
Here.
Chris Worley.
On the phone?
Tara Zirinsky.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It looks like we have quorum, and let's jump into the meeting. I'll open for public comment. Seeing some folks over in the gallery there. Does anybody want to make a public comment or statement? Okay, hearing none, thank you very much. We will move on to our first action item, which is the approval of the minutes from our meeting last month on January 29th, 2019.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Glenn. So we have a motion on the floor to approve the minutes of our last meeting. Any discussion, edits, questions, comments? Okay, hearing none, let's take a vote to approve the minutes from last month. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, motion passes. Thank you very much. We approve the minutes. And now we'll continue on to our committee reports. The first committee presentation will be by our Secretary Treasurer, John Hayes. John, I know you're on the phone, so I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Eddie. I'm going to pass it over to Todd. Given the phone timing delays and things of that nature, I think it would be a clearer presentation if Todd would handle it. We did go through the statements in detail at the Finance Committee meeting last week. So, Todd, if you could go ahead and run through the particulars.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Just working through the month of January. It's 1 month into the year. As you can see, we are $135,000 better than budget for the month. A lot of that is due to timing. It's early in the year. We're a little light on revenue, about 28,000. The net is about 11 after cost of goods, so a little off on revenue, but again, expenses were really well managed. And a lot of those expenses may come later, but we think we have enough to at least cover the shortfall in revenue for the month. So if you think about some of the things as far as expenses, it's timing. To give you an idea, the overall revenue for January is 7.9% of the annual budget. The expenses are 8.8% of the annual budget. So it's timing. We have a lot of contractors. So, it's early in the year. It's pretty close to planned, actually better, but again, it's early in the year. Slide to the next one there, Janet. Slide up. Good. Again, I usually reserve this to Tom because he likes to break out all the good news, but I'll let the chairman, if acting chairman, yeah, here you go. He wants to do a rah-rah we want to focus on the positive there. Come back down a little bit. Okay, passenger traffic up again. Oops, there you go. Our passenger traffic is up. You see that normally when our passenger traffic is up, one of the areas you see it directly is in our parking. So, but for us, one of the things that you see is a turnaround. Allegiant was down versus last year, but the other legacy carriers are up. And that works out for us on the terminal side, where the expenses are kind of projected out as far as how we cost out things. So when the legacy carriers are up, we actually benefit a little bit on the terminal side. So again, we've had some really, really great months. So 3.2 continues an upward trend. So it's overall great stuff. I'll let Eddie and Tom, do some additional comments on this a little later, but this is good stuff. Again, our traffic is up, and that means if you look at last year, we're at 792. At some point, maybe we'll be back up to 1 million, which we were, I think, in the early 2000s. Slide down. Again, this is kind of breaking down where we are, what I mentioned already. You see where I said number 2 up there, where it says about the increase in terminal revenue. And again, that's because of the mix, the way we do our pricing. And a lot of that is based on who shares who actually uses the terminal. When you talk about the cost, it's kind of allocated based on passenger count. So when the legacy carriers are up, like I mentioned earlier, they pay a higher percentage allegiance on that per turn, so it doesn't help us as much, but obviously we get more. We were down a little bit on the cargo, which we kind of knew about. It's down a little bit. We think some of that will come back later, but early on, we're just kind of going with the flow as far as that's concerned. Now, one of the things that does impact us when cargo flights go down is some of our aviation services, the de-icing. This is our de-icing season, so that hurts us a little bit on revenue. But again, overall, only 28,000 gross revenue, about 11,000 net revenue. So again, not bad at all. You see it on here on the expense side, which was really well managed. Again, it's early, 1 month. We've had materials and supplies. I talked about that at our finance meeting. We ordered supplies earlier for our snow season because we had that bad storm in November, so that kind of helped us out earlier in this year's budget. But the other expenses, again, some of that's timing, but overall, good stuff for 1 month. Interest is down a little bit. We had some kind of an issue with one of our banks, and that should be reflected in next month. Overall, again, pretty decent for 1 month. Slide up to the last one, which is cash. Again, cash, we had talked about this before. It's something we monitor really strongly around here, which is obviously something. See down there, that 82.2, that is after contingency, after reserves. We've got 82 days of cash on hand, and we're projecting 84 in January, 12 months out. If we're comparing our budget, remember we talked about that last month where, hey, some of the timing with the shutdown and some of that. So we're actually $2.5 million better on December now than we were on the budget. So we think we'll have $2.5 million more in cash in December versus where we were in the budget. And a lot of that's just timing and things coming in a different way. But overall, you can see cash has returned to a little bit more comfort level now that we were a little nervous last month, but we're back on stride with that. So at this point, I'll open it up to the floor. Does anybody have any questions?
Todd, I have a
Yeah.
question in terms of, this is great stuff and the detail is wonderful. You can see at the middle of the year, our cash position goes up to 13.8 million. significant difference from the beginning of the year at 5.2 and the end of the year where we're projecting 5.3. Just for the edification of the group and for those who are on the phone and can't see this, could you just kind of just walk us through just the ebbs and flows of cash flow management?
Great question. One of the things you have with our cash flow is the timing of when we get our grants back. So for us, we front money. So we're fronting, if you remember, we got a big grant from the state, $16 million. We still have to front that money out, and then they give us back. The state is notoriously slow in paying. So you'll see some of that timing come in there where it's like, hey, we're getting some money in. Oh, obviously, it's just the timing of it. So again, we have that peak in the middle, but it'll work itself out. It'll come in and it'll go right back out. And I think that is a lot to do with when we have the bulk of our payments in that time period. Because you'll get the reimbursements and then we'll be turning around and paying it back. And you remember, that's probably because when is our shutdown for the May. So if you think about timing on when we're going to pay this stuff, that's probably when we're going to really start to ramp up as far as paying some of these things. Because this is actually the cash going out. This is not necessarily when we actually incur it, but this is the cash going out. So does that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
Any other questions, concerns? Again, it's 1 month. No reason to panic one way or another. There's no reason to get too excited. It's 1 month. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Todd. And I'd go ahead and make a motion that we accept the finance report as presented by Todd.
Can I get a second, please? Second. Seconded by Mike. Okay, open to any further discussions, questions, edits? Okay, hearing none, let's take the vote on this motion. All those in favor of accepting the treasurer's report as presented by Todd and John, please say aye. Aye. All those against? Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much. Thanks, John. Thanks, Todd, for a good financial report and obviously some good results. We'll move on now to the Business Development Committee. I'll pass the floor to Matt.
Thanks. Good meeting last Thursday of the Business Development Committee with updates on capital projects and on business development initiatives. One small item coming out of the committee meeting, committee approved a PennDOT interchange maintenance agreement. I'll hand it over to Steve to give a quick synopsis of that for the board.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everybody. These are our PennDOT maintenance agreements. Three agreements for litter collection, sweeping, and mowing of the interchange at Route 22 and Airport Road. I don't know, Janet, if you can scroll down and open up the graphic that kind of shows where this area is. Basically, 7.6 miles of sweeping, 3.8 miles of litter collection, and about 48 acres of grass mowing. And basically, the Airport Road, Route 22 interchange, you can see our runway end, runway 31 there along Postal Road. We're reimbursed for these trips over there to about $34,000 per year. And these are 3-year agreements for a total of reimbursable agreement, or total amount of $102,000 about. We have the equipment to maintain these properties, as I said, about 46 acres. Our airfield is 530 acres of grass. So inside the airfield, we're doing about 530 throughout the process. We are, as I said, reimbursed for our labor, equipment, and expenses. 3-year term. The bonus with this is because of its location next to our runway end, we're able to get in there and do a lot of this maintenance to prevent wildlife attractants. We keep the grass maintained at a level consistent with our wildlife hazard mitigation plan and obstruction removal. We're actually been able to go in here in these areas and remove a lot of trees as they pop up as obstructions. So that's it in a nutshell. Any questions?
So we are able to maintain the surrounding area at a higher standard to the airport than PennDOT would otherwise do as a result of these agreements?
Absolutely.
And I think I would highlight for the group, excuse me, that there weren't any major safety or financial risks by us assuming this responsibility in lieu of the state.
Correct.
So it wound up not being anything extraordinary, and it probably is a good thing since we'll maintain it as good, if not better, than what the state
And
is
how
doing.
long have we been doing this?
We've actually been engaged in these agreements since 1996. Based on its location, it's always been kind of the doorstep to the airport. So we want, as folks are coming on and off Route 22 to Airport Road, it kind of gives a better impression of our airport frontage.
Following recommendation of the committee, I'd like to move that we authorize the executive director to execute these 3 comprehensive municipal agreements with PennDOT for continued maintenance of the airport road interchange.
Great, thank you, Matt. Can I get a second, please? Second. Okay, seconded by Larry. Any further discussion, questions, comments about the motion? Okay, hearing none, let's please take a vote. All those in favor of approving the PennDOT interchange maintenance agreement as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against? Okay, hearing no, those against, motion passes. Thank you very much. And so we'll move on to the next order of business, which is the Executive Committee. I'll stand in place of Chuck. And what I'd like to do is pass the floor over to Larry to give us a quick update on the nominating committee. So Larry, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Chuck asked me to form and chair a nominating committee for 2019, which I have done. And folks that we've nominated, this is just for the committee. Myself, Chuck, Ed, John, and Mike Schwer. During our March meeting next month, we will present a slate of candidates, and during the April meeting, we will vote for the presented candidates, and their term will begin in May. While May may seem a little late in the year for selecting officers, a couple of years ago, we made changes, and that changed the terms and dates of the governors. And I've asked Judge if he could just kind of explain how that came about.
You'll recall that we changed our annual organizational meeting from January until April. That was done because of possibility of inclement weather and so forth. There was a change in our bylaws, and the bylaws as they currently exist provide that the annual reorganizational meeting now occurs the last Tuesday in April. And at that time, of course, we're reorganizing, so there's an election as to the new officers, and their terms commence with that annual reorganizational meeting in April. So now it's an April to April cycle rather than January to the next January for the one-year terms.
Thank you, Judge. Appreciate it. Just plan on voting later on, and
Which positions will be,
we'll
will the
have
nominating committee
have-
be accepting?
we'll have the chair,
deciding on nominees?
vice chair, secretary.
The county
treasurer.
representatives, is that?
As well, yes.
Okay.
Lehigh and Northampton, yeah,
Okay. So there's 5 positions.
correct.
Yeah, thank you, Ted. Yeah, there are 5, president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, and then the 2 county representatives.
Any other questions? See you next month.
Okay, thank you. And we'll, excuse me, we'll move on to the next order of business, which is a director's report. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as Todd had alluded to, another good month, January, we saw a little over 3% increase in passenger activity at ABE, and charge really was led by American with a 21% increase. So it's great to see American, Delta as well, having a very good January in spite of the weather and some cancellations. So always good to see that. Continue to just do some follow-up for us from last meeting in January at our board meeting. Staff did make it out to Harrisburg and met with our freshman legislators, so some good meetings, and was out there with Colin, so a lot of good discussions taking place out there. February 10th through the 12th, Todd was at the AAAE Annual Finance and Admin Conference. So it's kind of our airport industry annual conference for CFOs and other folks in his world. So he was down in, unfortunately, Clearwater, Florida, a terrible place to be in February.
Tough tour of duty.
But it seemed like a very good conference, and I'm glad we were able to get that accomplished. On the flip side of that, the 12th through the 14th of February, Darren was at the Roots America Conference, which is an air service conference through ACI. That one is in Quebec City. So we appreciate Darren making his way even further north during February and actually making it back as well. So February 12th, we did announce our 13th, lucky 13th, nonstop destination, Nashville, Tennessee. So that kicks off May 17th. Very excited about that. And February 11th through the 22nd, we finished our TSA pre-check enrollment event here at ABE, and we now have over 8,600 persons who've enrolled just at ABE through that process. So continues to be phenomenal.
Next one scheduled?
Next one's not scheduled as of right now. Colin, do we have a date on that?
We do not have data on that.
Okay.
So I will check for you.
Okay. So we're working through, but we will have some additional pre-check events coming. And then in terms of upcoming events, I did want to make mention that in March, that actually kicks off PennDOT's Real ID availability. So if those of you that came out to any of our pop-up events, PennDOT is no longer holding pop-up events in the Commonwealth. We will have a Real ID center on 1101 MacArthur Road in Whitehall, so you can go directly to the Real ID Center to bring your documents or get your Real ID. So just making everyone aware that that's now in place. March 5th, I'm going to be participating in the Greater Lehigh Valley Chamber of Commerce Young Professional Council Leadership Summit. So Frank, I think we'll be probably around for that one. And also, March 13th, we rescheduled the Greater Lehigh Valley Chamber of Commerce President's Roundtable event, which we're doing here. So we had a little weather that kind of impacted our February date, but we moved that to the 13th, so looking forward to that. March 11th, some of you may have received notice already, starts rebadging. Our security badges are good every 2 years, so we always replace those, and that'll be coming. So red and white badge holders a little bit later on, I think in May, but just be aware that that's going to be going on this year. It's a pretty large undertaking to rebadge every employee here at the airport. So looking forward to getting that moved through. And then at the end of the month, the 27th through the 29th, I will be attending the Northeast Chapter of AAA has their annual airports conference in Hershey, so I will be out at the annual conference out there. And that really concludes the report. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay. Thank you, Tom, and I'll open the floor to questions.
What's the rebadging policy for the other airports?
So the maximum that an identification badge can be valid is 24 consecutive calendar months.
Okay, so that does apply to the other airports.
Yes.
'Cause I didn't see anything about the other airports.
Okay. So when you say other airports,
Queen City and...
yeah, Queen City and Braden, not under TSA regulations. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I misunderstood your question.
Okay, so those badges can be valid indefinitely?
They can be valid for a much longer duration.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Sure.
Great. Other questions for Tom? Okay. Hearing none, thank you very much again, Todd and staff, for a very good report. And we'll continue on then to the solicitor's report.
As you will hear me say over the next couple of months, I'll repeat once again, the statement of financial interest is due May 1, and those forms are available. Sylvette has the forms if you need a form, and then the forms are filed with Sylvette. Once again, if anybody has any questions about any of the questions there or how they should be answered, contact me and I'll go over it with you, and we'll work out any particular questions that you have. So once again, it's due May 1, so you have some time to get it together, and we're available to discuss it with you if you need anything. I do have something else, but I'm going to reserve that for an executive session.
Okay, great. Thank you, Judge. So it sounds like we have two administrative items we got to cover off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Get the forms in and rebadge. So everyone just please keep that top of mind, and then we'll be good. Okay, so thank you, Judge, for the solicitor report. We're going to transition into new business now. Before we do so, we'd just like to call on Ted to present a amendment to our bylaws. Would you like me to set up some context, Ted, if I may?
I'm happy to set up context if you'd like.
Okay, yep, go ahead then,
Sure.
please. The floor is yours.
So I think as most board members know, about 2 years ago, I was actually signing a contract with the airport, and I noticed that some of the non-discrimination language didn't seem to be up to date. So I quietly proposed to the executive director at that time that maybe it's time to modernize this stuff from an HR perspective, contract perspective, et cetera. And then the process ended up, becoming analyzed by many people over a number of years. And, in our attempt to modernize it and get it up to date, we also noticed that the bylaws were a little bit out of date as well. So there's been an awful lot of discussion, mostly in the executive committee, not much in the public board meetings about this topic. And, the whole range of opinions and concerns. Folks like myself, feel like it's a no-brainer, and we should be right at the leading edge of our non-discrimination policies. And then others had some serious concerns about, well, if we add additional protected groups to our non-discrimination, is the airport taking on additional financial liability and opening itself up to, lawsuits and claims. So the original bylaw amendment that sort of evolved and came before the executive committee included sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And quite recently, there was a lot of concern expressed about the latter two, and what is going to be the next marginalized group, and are we going to have to be modifying our bylaws every year as the marginalized group du jour, the next one comes in to effect. And so just quite recently, I had a nice call with Judge Friedberg and really studied what the current bylaw says. And I think everybody has a copy here. But it says, employees and board members shall adhere to all laws and regulations that provide equal opportunity for all citizens regardless of, and then it provides the list of currently explicitly listed groups. If you'll notice, the current bylaw does include gender. And so I started to think, and the other key part of this is, shall adhere to all laws and regulations. So the bylaws are just saying, look, we're going to follow the law with regard to these historically marginalized groups. So if there's no law, I don't think the bylaw creates any obligation to follow anything. It's just nice to list the groups that philosophically we go out of our way to make sure we're not discriminating against. So because gender is there, I started to feel more and more comfortable that gender expression and gender identity would be covered by that. And as new laws emerge that might protect additional groups, we would, by having gender in there, we'd be required to follow those laws. So to me, the only real glaring omission, when you look at it that way, is sexual orientation. And I do believe that sexual orientation is something that it's arguably 10% of the population. It's not exactly a new group or anything that's, out there or fringe and we probably all know lots of gay people, for example. So I just think with the airport staying, with the times, that I think it is appropriate to have sexual orientation listed in our bylaws. And again, with the preamble to this bylaw, if there is no regulation, then technically we're not really saying that we're required to adhere to it, but as regulations, as the law evolves, that would be required with this addition. And final thing I have to say is, I've said from the beginning that I think it's a no-brainer. I still think it's a no-brainer, and it's not exactly, groundbreaking in terms of our area. Both county executives have made resolutions or proclamations or, saying that, the counties will not discriminate. Governor Wolf has done that, same thing at the state level, and all three local cities have done the same thing. So I think this is a simple change. It's less controversial than what perhaps was proposed earlier. And what I'd like to do is submit this for consideration for a vote at the next meeting and give us our, 21 days of notice.
Well, what Ted is planning on offering to do here is his prior offering was tabled, and that's its status now, and he's decided that he's not going to ask to bring it back for consideration, but is going instead to change his proposed amendment, or have a new proposed amendment, which is set forth in this form, limiting the request only to the term sexual orientation. Is that correct?
That is
correct statement? You're not pursuing the gender identity and gender expression language,
That is
limiting
correct.
it now simply to sexual orientation. The procedure to do that is as follows. It is for anyone, any member of the board can make a motion to amend the bylaws. What's required is that it's got to be in writing, it's got to be submitted at least 21 days in advance of the Board of Governors meeting when the matter will be considered. And it comes before the board then for a vote. If it is moved at the Board of Governors meeting by the person that proposes it and seconded by another member of the Board of Governors, it's then subject to discussion, and a two-thirds vote passes it. If it's not a two-thirds vote, it doesn't pass. That's the system. Now, Ted is going to ask that this be circulated to comply with the 21-day requirement. And
This is the written request.
this is the written request that has been handed out to everyone else. The next board meeting, of course, is at the end of March. That comes pretty quickly. It's the end of February. It's only 28 days with the 21-day requirement. The thinking was that it's preferable to list this for the April meeting, which is at April 24th, I think, somewhere around there. That will give adequate time for everyone to be fully appraised as to what the request is, what the proposed amendment is. It will allow all members who want to be here to arrange their schedules so that they can be present for that. And if there are other proposals on this topic, they can be considered at the same time. Quite obviously, we don't want to do this seriatim. If there are other proposals, they all ought to be before the board at the same meeting. In order to accomplish that, I think the appropriate way to do it is to list this for the April board meeting. You will be getting from the Secretary of the Airport Authority, Ted's proposal to comply with the 21-day requirement. If there are any other members of the board who have other proposals on this topic, get them to us as soon as possible. I'm available to help you draft them if you need that assistance, but keep in mind that we would have to have them so that notice could be given in advance of the 21 days in advance of the April board meeting. Anybody have any questions about anything Ted said or that I said?
My only other comment at this time would be that if this does pass, I would like to see Tom and Todd and HR just sort of modernize the employee handbook and, include some of this in the description of the culture of the airport, where appropriate. So
In anticipation, in anticipation of the April meeting, I will be circulating to all of you a memo regarding the status of the law in this area, so that you can have that information and be informed on that as well.
Okay. Thank you, Ted. Just, is that agreeable to everybody, by the way? I think we just want to reconfirm that this will be voted at the April meeting. Is that okay? Because the 21-day window can meet the March meeting, but I think that's a reasonable proposal.
If there are no other proposals, could we not vote on it at the March meeting?
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
If there are no other proposals, could we not vote on it on the March meeting?
Well, there may be other proposals, and I don't want
I
to
do not
foreclose the
plan on-
possibility of that. So that's why I was suggesting that we waited this long to extend it one more month to give others who may be considering making contrary proposals or additional proposals. I think they ought to have that opportunity.
They have the 21 days. But I get it.
2 years, you say?
That's when I first raised the topic.
Okay. So we've discussed this quite at length at the committee meetings. I think it was good, robust meetings. We circulated information, different perspectives from counsel, external counsel, and advisors, insurance company, et cetera. So I think what's good is we've kind of given this the time it deserves. We've got a lot of information in our hands. We've, allowed everyone to voice their opinions, et cetera. So I think we are going to come to a conclusion on this. I think, I'm glad we're agreeing that we'll do it in April. If there are any other alternative proposals, please submit them soon so we don't extend this process any further. That's all. And I think definitely in April we'll have some conclusion. But in the meantime, again, please submit anything that you would like to the judge and to Tom as well, I would recommend. Okay, so thank you again, Ted, appreciate it. At this.
One other thing, if I could just mention, in my report, I neglected to mention, we will be advertising, we did just touch on this during committee, but we will be advertising, we're actually on the street already with a request for qualifications for hotel, retail development on airport property. So we did talk about this. The actual documents are available on the flylvia.com website. There's a mandatory pre-proposal meeting, pre-proposal meeting March 14th here. So we're just making folks aware on the board that is out there, and we'll be seeing some more about that.
Okay. Thank you. Tom, so is the RFP or RFQ out
Yes.
officially?
It is officially released, and it's available on our website.
Okay, great. Good to know, and then there's a mandatory meeting.
Yeah, so the mandatory March.
My apologies, non-mandatory pre-proposal meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
It's different than
Non-mandatory.
mandatory.
March 14th. Voluntary
And where is that meeting going to be held?
here.
Here?
So this would still be news around April 11th. Still be in the process.
Yeah, that's correct. So responses are due April 26th to the RFQ.
Okay, exciting times. We're entertaining proposals to develop the airport and potentially hotels and other retail. Pretty cool stuff.
Right.
Boy, what a difference a few years makes, huh? Okay, good. So thank you for that, guys. I know it was a lot of work putting that RFQ together, and it's out officially, and we have a potential meeting for interested parties. Okay. Anything else, Tom?
That was it. I apologize.
Okay, great. So we'll move on from the new business section of our meeting to now executive session. I believe the judge recommended executive
I
session.
request an executive session to discuss pending litigation involving Northeast Aviation. This will be very brief, I expect.
Any vote?
There will be a vote following my request, yes.
Okay.